Okay, settle down, ladies, settle down. I know you're very excited, exchanging recipes. Shavuot is coming in just a few days from now. Cheesecakes, right? All this is going on over here. Settle down. We have a lot of work to do before the big day. Okay. How exciting is it? Shavuot is the anniversary of Matan Torah, where we honor and celebrate the greatest day in the history of the Jewish people, the greatest day in the history of the world. It's the day Am Yisrael received this discipline called Torah. It's the day that Kadosh Baruch Hu singled us out as the Am HaNivchar, His chosen nation, as it says, as we recite, Ata bechartanu mikol ha'amim, ahavta otanu, veratzita banu, veromamtanu mikol haleshonot. That's Shavuot, that's Matan Torah. But what's less well known is that Shavuot is the yahrzeit of one of the greatest of tzaddikim, and that's none other than David Hamelech, alav shalom. Some opinions say that Shavuot was the day that David Hamelech was born in, and all opinions agree that Shavuot is the day in which David Hamelech passed away. So today I want to learn a little bit about the life of David Hamelech. I want to learn it with you from a new perspective that some of you may not have known before. So the first thing you need to know is that David Hamelech was not only a king. Rashi HaKadosh alav shalom says that he was also a Navi. He was a Navi. So once we understand that Shavuot is the Chag, is the Chag of David Hamelech, we could try to understand why we read Megillat Ruth. Because if you think about it, what does Megillat Ruth have to do with Shavuot? I mean, Megillat Ruth does not discuss Matan Torah. Megillat Ruth does not describe or recite the Aseret Adibrot. It's a very nice story about Boaz, about Ruth, Naomi. But why is this the Megillah that we read on Shavuot? Why is this story earmarked for this Chag? And of course, one of the explanations is that at the end of Megillat Ruth is where we're told that Boaz married Ruth, and they had a child named Oved, and Oved had a child named Ishai, and Ishai had a child named David. So Ishai was the father of David Hamelech. So now we know why we read Megillat Ruth, because it chronicles how David Hamelech came into the world. So obviously it's appropriate that on the Haskara, on the day of his Haskara and his yahrzeit, we should read the genealogy of David Hamelech, alav shalom. But today, however, I want to share with you an amazing chidush, an amazing Gemara. It's going to blow your mind. And the Gemara is in Masechet Yevamot. And when I'm going to reveal this to you, you're not going to believe it. But the Gemara tells us of a very troubling episode that took place in the life of David Hamelech. Now, this story is not written in the Navi anywhere. It's alluded to somewhat in Sefer Tehillim, but it's written explicitly with all the details in the Gemara. So, let's start. As we know, when David was young, Shaul was the Melech BeYisrael, and Shaul was looking for someone to do battle with the giant Goliath. And David at that time was a shepherd, not very well known, and he volunteered for this mission. So at first, everybody was shocked, because no one really thought that he was suitable for the job of bringing down such a famous giant. But since he was the only willing candidate, so they dressed him up, Shaul dressed him up in a special armor. And that armor, compared to David Hamelech, who was small, was quite big. But lo and behold, when they dressed David up in the armor, somehow it managed to fit him perfectly. It was as if this armor was tailor-made, custom-made for David. So at that moment, a bell went off in Shaul Hamelech's mind, because the Mesorah held that the person who fits into these clothes would one day be suitable to be the Melech B'Yisrael. So now, there was a buzz in the battlefield among all the soldiers, because nobody ever dreamed that the armor would fit David. And piqued with a curiosity, Shaul asks the man over there, who's this boy? And he's told, what do you mean, you don't know who this is? You see, David may not have been famous at that time, but his father Yishai was a big tzaddik. He was actually one of the few men that passed on from this world without an avera. So everybody knew who Yishai was, so why is Shaul HaMelech asking who this boy is? And the Gemara says, Shaul knew who Yishai was. He knew that David came from the tribe of Yehudah, but Shaul was actually asking a very specific and direct question. You see, Yehudah, the original tribe, he had two sons, twins. One was named Peretz, and the other was named Zerach. And the Mesorah, the tradition held that if you descended from Peretz, from that lineage, then you would be destined for Malchut, for the monarchy. But if you descend from the Zerach line, then you're destined to become a prince, a Nasi. Therefore, Shaul wanted to know, because the clothes fit, and David came from the tribe of Yehudah, which is the tribe of Malchut. So all he needed to know now was which son did he descend from? Was he a Parzi or was he a Zarchi? So after a little bit of investigating, it was made known to Shaul that David actually descends from Peretz. So Shaul starts to panic. He starts to worry that David is going to be his competition. And there was what to be afraid of, because David had all the qualifications. He had the right genes, he had the correct family affiliations, and the clothes fit. So rumors spread, the word spread, and once again there was a buzz, this time in the Bet Midrash, and people started to talk about David's possible ascension to the throne. And while everyone's discussing this inyan, who walks into the Bet Midrash? Doeg Ha'adomi. Now, without getting into details about Doeg's life, let me just tell you what happened to Doeg at the end. Doeg is one of the few people that the Mishnah says does not have a chelek in Olam Haba. That's the individual that we're talking about here. But the Gemara of Sanhedrin informs us that before that, meaning before he was rendered as not having a chelek in Olam Haba, Doeg was considered one of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of his time. He was so great that they referred to him as Ha'adomi, the red one. Not because he had a reddish appearance or a reddish complexion, he wasn't the gingy. It was because he made people turn red in the face. How did he do that? Because when he used to walk into the Bet Midrash, all the Chachamim blushed. They turned red in the face because of his chokhmah, because of his wisdom. Nobody was able to answer his chidushim. His Torah was so strong. His questions were so on the mark. Nobody was able to keep up with this guy, with him. So, in walks Doeg Adomi, and everyone there starts to shake. And he notices that there's a tumult in the Bet Midrash. So he asks, what's all the fuss about today? So they answer him, well, Kvod Harav, we're talking about the young boy David, who's probably going to be the next king of Israel, the next Melech B'Yisrael. Doeg is shocked. And he says, Melech B'Yisrael, king of Israel? Listen, Rabotai, I don't want to burst your bubble, but before you discuss David's worthiness of the crown, let's discuss if he's even Jewish. Oh, Doeg just dropped the bomb in the Bet Midrash. He says, it seems that you're putting the wagon before the horse. You already decided David is going to be the next king, but you haven't even asked yourself if he's Jewish. Well, what do you mean, is he Jewish? They ask him. Of course he's Jewish. What kind of question is that? So Doeg says, yeah, I know he's Jewish, but I'm not sure if he's allowed to marry into our people. I'm not sure if he's allowed to be accepted into the Kahal Hashem. So everybody wanted to know, well, why do you say that? Like, where is this coming from? And he says, well, because his grandmother was Ruth. So everyone says, so what? Ruth was a Gioret, Ruth was a convert. He says, no problem. I know she's a convert. But Ruth was a Moavi convert. Now I don't know about you, but in my Torah it says, Lo yavo Moavi bekahal Hashem. We're not allowed to accept Moavi converts into our kahal. They could convert. We're not going to stop them from converting, but they can't marry into our kind. They can't marry another Jewish person. They have to marry into themselves, into their own kind. That means if you come from any other nation other than Moab, you could convert without a problem, and you could marry whoever you see fit. But when it comes to the Moavim, there's a very strict limitation. They can convert, but they can only marry amongst themselves. Now, why is it like this? We're told that Moavim were known to be very cruel people. You see, when the Jewish people were coming out of Mitzrayim, they passed by the land of Moab. And we sent them a message asking if they would be kind enough to sell us some provisions, some food, a little bit of water. Now, I want you to try to imagine the scene, ladies. You have 3 million people standing there in the Midbar. If every person buys 2 cups of water at $1 a piece, that's $6 million cash in one day, and that's only on water. I'm not talking about the tuna wraps and the French fries and the... So Moab now had a chance to make a financial killing on Bnei Israel. What does Moab do? They send a message back saying, we're not interested. We don't want to provide you with food or drinks. So they were not very hospitable people. But that's not the reason we don't accept them into our kahal, into our congregation. Because there were other nations out there that displayed terrible anti-Semitism, and they're still given the right to marry into the Jewish people. But Moab, besides being inhospitable, they were extremely ungrateful. Because where did Moab originate from? Moab's father was Lot. Lot was Avraham Avinu alav shalom's nephew. Now let's review the story for a moment. Lot was, if you remember, living in Sodom when HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to destroy that sinful city. And Lot only escaped because the Malachim saved his life. So what happened? He and his 2 daughters end up in a cave, and thinking that they were the only people left on earth, they got drunk, and Lot's 2 daughters each conceived a child with their father, with Lot. One of the sons was called Moab, hence the name Moab, because Moab means Me'av, from the father. So Lot was the father of Moab. And in whose merit was Lot saved by? In whose merit? In the merit of our father, Avraham Avinu. So Avraham Avinu risked his life when Lot was captured by the kings, if you remember that story. And he did battle with those kings in order to redeem Lot. And he also begged the Kadosh Baruch Hu to save Lot's life when Sodom was going to be destroyed. So now, at this point, the children of Abraham are coming to the children of Lot, and they're asking them if they could please buy. They're not even asking them to give it to them for free. They're asking them to buy some food and drinks from them. And their answer is no. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very angered by this. And he says, you know, you're a bunch of ingrates. You owe the Jewish people. You know what you should be doing? You should be offering them food and drinks on the house free of charge, and you don't even allow them to buy these items? Don't you remember what their grandfather did for your grandfather? If it wasn't for Avraham Avinu, you wouldn't even be here today. Moab was so cruel that Borei Olam said, you know what? They could convert, because I'm not going to stop them from converting, but they can never be allowed to enter the Ka'al Hashem. They're going to have to marry among themselves. So Doeg comes along into the Bet Midrash and he says, listen, Ruth is a Moabite convert. David is her grandchild, so he's not allowed to enter the Ka'al Hashem either. And he even says, you know, it's quite comical. You guys make me laugh. He says, because you're talking about his kingdom, his malchut, his ascension to the throne. But first you have to talk about whether or not this man has any validation whatsoever as a Jewish individual in Klal Yisrael. So at that point, one of the Rabbanim in the Bet Midrash stood up and he said, Mechila Doeg. But I think you're a little mistaken. The Pasuk says, Lo yavo Moavi b'kahal Hashem. It means Moavi velo Moavit. The men are banned from joining us, not the women. So Ruth is perfectly legitimate. And all the rabbis now start chuckling a little bit because they think they've just stumped Doeg. But Doeg is very confident. And he says, oh, very nice. That's a very nice drash that you have over there. Moavi, velo Moavi. It's cute, I like it. But let me ask you this. What are you going to do with the pasuk in the Torah that says, Lo yavo mamzer b'ka'al Hashem? Are you going to say, mamzer velo mamzeret? Oh, everybody there was quiet because they didn't know what to say. And he tells them, listen, you want to use a drash to legitimize Ruth? So I'm going to come along and I'm going to make a new law that a person who's born from an isur of Gilui Arayot, that only applies to the boys, not the girls. Because if you can come along and make chidushim, Moab velo Moavit, Moavi velo Moavit, I could come along and make a chidush, mamzer velo mamzeret. So the Rabbanim says, okay, Doeg, you got a point there, but relax, we didn't yet blush. So they're thinking, say, you know what? I'll tell you what the answer is, Doeg. The Torah says that it's the men who didn't come to offer food and drink, because it's really the way of the men to go out and greet the guests. But it's not the way of the women. After all, it's not sanua. It's not modest for the women to come out and greet the men and offer them food and offer them drinks. It's not appropriate. It's not dignified. Therefore, there's no claim against the Moavi women. The Moavi women who stayed behind and they were not so hospitable, it was because of tzniyut reasons. That's why they didn't go out. But the men, they didn't have an excuse. So you're wrong, Doeg. You can't use the mamzer and mamzer drash, because when it comes to mamzerim, whether it's a boy or a girl, the entire act is forbidden. Therefore, both the boys and the girls are considered mamzerim if they come from a prohibited union. But in this case, there's a logical explanation as to why the men are forbidden and the women are not. So now, ladies, Doeg, he takes out his cannons and he fires with a deadly blow that makes all the Rabbanim in the room turn red in the face. He tells them, you know what, you're right. I agree with you. I'm all for tzniyut. And I'm going to be the first to agree that it's not appropriate for women to come out and greet foreign men. But the Moaviyot, these women should have at least come out to greet the Jewish women. A woman is allowed to go out and greet another woman. So although I agree that they don't have to go out and feed the men, but there were thousands and hundreds of thousands of women in Klal Yisrael. They couldn't go out with a piece of cake, with a glass of water, and offer it to another woman. They couldn't even do that. So therefore, I'm telling you, the Moaviyot are banned, and that means Zrut is forbidden, and that makes David illegitimate. I'll see you later. Have a nice day. Ladies, it got so tense in that Bet Midrash. All the Rabbanim were running around trying to come up with an answer to Doeg's question, to Doeg's logic and conclusion. Nobody could find an answer. And the Gemara says that they were so convinced that what Doeg said made sense that they were about to make an announcement all over the land. Rabotai, you should know that David is not permitted to enter into the Kahal Hashem. He's not allowed to marry into the Kahal Hashem. He's illegitimate because we cannot answer Doeg. Ladies, you can't imagine what David Hamelech went through. There was a point in his life, there was a few points, but in this point in his life, people were questioning his legitimacy and whether or not he's permitted to enter the Kahal Hashem. David's life, by the way, wasn't being contested by a small group of Lashon Haraniks. It wasn't being challenged by a small group of naysayers, troublemakers. We're talking about Doeg HaDomi. The most brilliant mind of that generation is drawing this conclusion. And even though it's the same Doeg who later on, we're told, didn't have a chelek in Olam Haba, but at this point in our story, he's still considered one of the biggest Talmidei Chachamim of his generation. So what he says has weight. But all of a sudden, another tzaddik walks into the Bet Midrash, and that tzaddik was named Amasa. He sees this big fuss going on. He's inquiring about the fuss, and they tell him, oh, we're busy making signs that we have to hang in the streets announcing David's illegitimacy. And they proceed to give him a rundown of the entire debate and what Doeg's final conclusion was and how they couldn't come up with an answer for him, which means Doeg must be right. At that point, Amasa takes out his sword. He shows it to everybody, and he thrusts the sword into the middle of the Bet Midrash. And he says, Rabotai, I have a Mesorah, I have a tradition that goes back to Shmuel HaNavi, and he's still alive, so you could go ask him yourself. And Shmuel has a Mesorah that goes all the way back to the times of the Torah HaKdosha and Har Sinai. And he says that when the Torah says Moavi, it's referring only to the men, not to the women. That's our Mesorah, and when it comes to the Mesorah, there are no questions to be asked. Anybody here want to challenge our Mesorah? Bechavod. The sword is right here waiting for you. I'll kill you. Everybody took a step back. Well, if you put it that way, Amasa, we're not going to challenge you. Now, ladies, imagine for a second. Imagine a rabbi comes to the Bet Midrash with an M16, and he says to everybody there, Rabotai, the halacha is what the Torah says. And anybody here have a question? Anybody here wants to argue with me? I have the M16 in my hand. Who's going to argue with such a rabbi? But then the Gemara says that they all tell him, okay, Amasa, we accept what you said about Mesorah, about Shmuel HaNavi, about not asking questions about our Mesorah. But the Gemara, this Gemara ends with the words, Mikol Makom Kashe. At the end of the day, it's still a very difficult chapter to understand. And indeed, Doeg has a very valid point. After all, why didn't the Moavi women go out to greet the Jewish women? So these rabbis in the Bet Midrash, they want to know, listen, even with these questions and doubts, and we know that we still follow the halakha even when we have a doubt, and we have to cling to the Mesorah, we have to cling to the words of Shmuel HaNavi, we understand men could go out and greet. They could go out to the streets. Women can't because it's inappropriate. But bottom line, Amasa, for the sake of easing our own conscience, we still have to answer Doeg's question. We can't just let it go. I mean, here we are punishing the Moavi men for not coming out to greet the people and giving them food. But why shouldn't the women also be punished? They didn't even come out to greet the women, which is mutar according to the halakha. See, we got to answer Doeg to ease our own conscience. And the Gemara says, do you know why they didn't come out to greet the Jewish women? And the answer is, there's a law, there's a rule. It says, Kol kevuda bat melech penima. A woman's glory, the honor of the daughter of the king, is that she remains penima. She remains inside. A woman who clings to the essence of her inner modesty, her profile should be in the home. She's not expected to go out, even if it means to greet another woman. Kol kevuda bat melech pnima. Now ladies, that doesn't mean that if a woman goes out to greet another woman that she's a protza. Not at all. But the point is, you can't have claims against her if she decides to remain inside, pnima. If she chooses to stay inside, she's merely following the rules of tzniyut, and you can't hold that against her. Therefore, the Moaviyot who chose not to come out and to greet the Jewish women, they can't be held accountable for that act, because they can come along and say, listen, we were just following the laws of tzniyut. The law in that day was that women don't go out, so we were just following tzniyut. Kol kvuda bat melech pnima. So the Gemara says, well, how do we know this? How do we know that this is the real reason that the Moaviyot didn't come out to greet the Jewish women? And the Gemara answers, we know it from another story in the Torah HaKdosha. The Torah tells us about the three malachim that came to visit Avraham Avinu, right? And one of the first questions that they had to Avraham was, Ayei Sarah ishtecha? Where's your wife Sarah? And Avraham answers, Hinei ba'ohel. She's in the tent. Rashi HaKadosh Alav Shalom says in these words, well, what was Sarah doing in the tent? She's there because that's where a woman is meant to be. Hinei ba'ohel means tzenu'ah hayta. That's the Gemara that I wanted to share with you. But now I want to take a few minutes to discuss this episode in the Torah of the Malachim coming to visit Abraham, because I think many of us don't really understand the depth of what took place when the Malachim came to see Avraham Avinu. So let me just review the story with you for a few seconds and then discuss it in depth with you. Now, if you remember, Avraham was on his third day of his Brit Milah when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent the Malachim to visit him. Now, we're told that the Malachim, each one of them had a particular mission. One Malach came to heal Avraham. That was Malach Raphael. One Malach came to give the good news that Sarah was going to conceive and have a child. He was Michael. And Malach Gavriel came to destroy the city of Sodom. Now, there's a question that should be directed straight towards Malach Gavriel. Gavriel, we know that you love tzaddikim. I know you love to visit tzaddikim, and it's probably a big zchut for you to see Avraham Avinu, who's the Gedol Hador of that generation. But our question to you, Gavriel, is, how come you didn't go straight to Sodom? I mean, Raphael had to come to Avraham Avinu in order to heal him, so he had to be there. Michael came in order to deliver the good news that Sarah was going to have a baby. But Gavriel, you know that the Malachim don't have a buddy system. They could travel alone. They're not scared of the dark. So why didn't you go straight to Sodom? Why didn't you go straight to do your mission? Instead, you took a detour and you joined the other malachim in visiting Avraham Avinu? What's the reason for this? It's a good question. Put that aside for a moment, because we have to ask another question. Gabriel asks Avraham Avinu, as soon as he sees him, Ayei Sarah ishtecha. Where's your wife Sarah? Now ladies, think about it for a moment. And many of you are Sfaradiot over here, so you could understand what I'm saying. If a rabbi came knocking on your door and your husband opened the door, and the first thing the rabbi asked is, where's your wife? I'm sure your husbands would have a lot of she'elot, and he would even tell this rabbi, what do you mean, where's my wife? What's up with you and my wife? It's not your business where my wife is. What's the she'elah? Where's my wife? Who are you to my wife? This question of Ayei Sarah ishtecha doesn't really make sense. Where's the derech eretz of a guest? The first question you ask as a male guest to the male host is, where's your wife? But we see that Avraham Avinu is not fazed by this question, and he answers very calmly, and he says, Hinei ba'ohel, my wife is in the tent. Ladies, we're told that this is a very difficult dialogue to understand, because obviously there's a hidden meaning behind the malach's question, and obviously there's a secret hidden meaning in Avraham Avinu's answer. And the Chidushei Harim, alav shalom, explains so brilliantly. I have to tell you that when I saw this vart, and when I heard it also, I was beside myself. I had to gather my bearings. But the Chidushei Harim says that Gabriel, who was going to destroy Sodom, he needed to come to see Avraham. You know why? Because he had a dilemma. Who's in Sodom? Lot. Gabriel was in a quandary as to what to do with Lot. Should I save Lot or should I not save Lot? Because in reality, Lot did not deserve to be saved. The only reason why Lot even merited a chance to be saved was because he was destined to be the father of Moab, and Moab was going to produce Ruth, and Ruth was going to bring David Hamelech into the world. Now, follow very carefully. If David is going to be rendered legitimate and allowed to enter the Kahal Hashem and have his due rights to be the king, then obviously Lot needs to be saved. But if anyway we're going to figure out, it's going to be a conclusion that Ruth is not legitimate and David by default is illegitimate, now what's the purpose of saving Lot, who doesn't even merit to be saved in his own right? So Gabriel had a big dilemma. And when you have a halachic dilemma, who do you go to? You approach the Gadol Hador. So Gabriel went to ask Avraham Avinu this she'elah. What's the real she'elah over here, ladies? The real she'elah is Ruth permitted to enter the kahal or not? That's the she'elah. And what's that dependent on? It's dependent on where the place of the woman really is, what her role really is, and where does she really belong. If the woman is in the tent, so then we could say that the Moaviyot should not be held accountable for not going out, right? Because that's the way of the women. And that would make Ruth legitimate, which would make David legitimate, and therefore Lot could be saved. We could save Lot. But if the women are out on the streets gallivanting, so then the Moaviyot should have also come out to greet at least the women. And in that case, that would render Ruth illegal. And by default, David Hamelech would be rendered pasul, and he wouldn't be allowed to enter the kahal. So then Lot would be killed off, wouldn't be saved. So now Malach Gabriel comes along, and one of the first things he asks is, Ayei Sarah ishtecha. Ladies, this wasn't a social question. This was a halacha question. And we see that Avraham Avinu picks up on this question. He understands the question of Vayei Sarah to mean, are the Moavi women permitted to enter the Kahal Hashem? Perush, is Ruth legitimate? Perush, is David legitimate? Perush, should I go save Lot? Now Avraham Avinu calibrates all of this in his mind in seconds. He immediately understands what the question is. So ladies, the answer to this question is going to be very, very significant, because if Avraham Avinu answers, oh, my wife, where is she? Oh, she's out roaming the streets. She's shopping somewhere in the middle of the midbar. She's getting together with her friends. They're making a bonfire. She's out there somewhere. What's the translation of this? It means, oh, the minhag hamakom, the custom is to go out regardless of who's on the street. And if the woman's custom was to go out, no matter who's on the street, men or women, then the Moavi women should have gone out to greet, at least to greet the Jewish women. And since they didn't do that, then they would become just as impermissible as the men. And that means that Ruth would be rendered psula and David would be rendered pasul. And if that's the case, Gabriel would have his answer and he would have to let Lot die in Sodom. But Avraham Avinu answers, Hine ba'ohel. Those words, Hine ba'ohel, actually perpetuate the legitimacy of David Hamelech. Even more than that, the words Hine ba'ohel actually maintains the legitimacy of Mashiach Tzidkenu. Because without David Hamelech, there would be no Mashiach ben David. So when Avraham Avinu says Hine ba'ohel, it was a psak halacha that due to the tzniyut of Sarah Imenu, whereby she did not go out to greet anybody, whether it was a man or a woman, that made David legitimate. And as a result, Mashiach ben David will one day reveal himself and redeem us all. And therefore, Lot had to be saved. Ladies, this is an unbelievable explanation. The Gemara of Shabbat says that when Mashiach comes, there's going to be a big celebration, a huge seudah, huge feast. And at the end of the seudah, we're going to have to recite the Birkat HaMazon. And the Rabbanim are going to start looking for a candidate to lead the Birkat HaMazon, the Zimun. So the first person they're going to go to is Avraham Avinu. And Avraham Avinu is going to say, thank you so much for this honor, but I'm really not worthy, because after all, I am responsible for Ishmael and all the Aravim that descended from him, that came to this world. So I don't feel that I'm a suitable candidate. Please find somebody else for the Zimun. So they're going to give that honor to Yitzchak. But he's going to say, thank you, Rabotai, for the honor, but I don't feel that I'm worthy, because you see, I brought Esav into the world, and by default, I brought Edom into the world. So I'm not very comfortable with this kavod. Please give it to somebody else. So then they're going to approach Yaakov Avinu, the Bechir Sheba'avot, and he's going to say, thank you, Todah, but after all, I did marry 2 sisters, which was a questionable act at that time. So I'm not either comfortable to make the zimun. I'm sure there are other bigger tzaddikim that may hear in this room. Please give the honor to them. And the Gemara tells us that the Rabbanim are going to go down the list, and each tzaddik is going to offer a different reason why he's not suitable to lead the Birkat HaMazon. And finally, they're going to ask David HaMelech. And what is David HaMelech going to say? He's going to say, Ani avarech veli na'el levarech. I'm going to gladly accept the honor, and you should know that I'm worthy to make this beracha. Shene'emar, kos yeshuot esa, uveshem Adonai ekra. Kos yeshuot esa, as he wrote in Sefer Tehillim, this exalted cup of salvation I will lift Uveshem Hashem ekra, and I will call out in the name of Hashem. So it seems that David Hamelech, when he wrote this pasuk in Tehillim, it seems like he predicted what the future would hold for him. He knew that he would one day get to the point where he would be able to lift this exalted cup. Kos Yeshuot esa, uveshem Hashem ekra. Why did David Hamelech feel that he was the right person to make the zimun in the future time, of course? Well, there's a halacha that says, Oreach mevarech. When you have a guest, the normal protocol according to the halacha is that the host, the Baal Habayit, is the one who makes the bracha over the hamotzi, over the bread. The host should not give that kavod to somebody else. Why? Because if you give that kavod to a guest, he may feel embarrassed because when he makes the bracha, he might want to, take a big piece for himself and he feels ashamed. So therefore, the host should be the one to make the bracha, to cut the bread, and to give out the portions. But when it comes to birkat hamazon, you could bestow that honor onto the guest, because then the guest who has to recite it out loud will bless you, bless your home, bless your wife, bless the children, bless the family. So David Hamelech says, listen, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, you're the avot. You're considered baalei batim. You're the hosts. You were born into this religion. But me, I come from root. I come from outside the religion. I'm considered the guest. I'm considered an oreach. And that's the rule. The rule is the guest has to make the zimun, right? And if you're going to come and tell me, David, you're right, you're a guest, but you're a guest that's questionable, you're not so legitimate, I can tell you you're wrong. I'm 100% legitimate. And do you know where I get my legitimacy from? I get it from Sarai Menu, because she was in the tent. And because she was in the tent, that made my grandmother Ruth legitimate, and that makes me legitimate. Ladies, this is why David uses the words Kos Yeshuot esa, because the word esa is Rashet Tevot Aye Sarah Ishtecha, which means that David Hamelech is hinting to everybody in that pasuk, and he's saying, you know why I have the right to make this beracha, to lift this kos shel bracha and make this zimun? Do you know why I'm 100% legitimate? It's because of that one question that was posed long ago to Avraham Avinu, Aye Sarah Ishtecha. That question and its final answer made me permissible, made me legitimate, made me worthy to enter the kahal. If you look at Megillat Ruth, which was authored by Shmuel HaNavi alav shalom, you're going to notice something very interesting. Every pasuk there starts with the letter Vav, except for 8 psukim. And all the Mefarshim wonder, is there a hidden code embedded in these 8 psukim? There must be something encrypted in those 8 psukim in Megillat Ruth, because the rest of the Megillah starts with Vav. So let's take a look at the first letter of each of those 8 psukim, because maybe there's a hidden message that Shmuel HaNavi was encrypting in the Megillah. So if you look at these 8 psukim which are scattered throughout the Megillah, you'll see one pasuk starts with a yud, one pasuk starts with a shin, one pasuk with an ayin, one with a yud, another one with a bet, another one with an aleph, another a hey, and another one with a lamed. Those 8 letters, they spell the following 2 words. Yish'i ba'ohel. My salvation is in the tent. Ladies, Shmuel HaNavi was telling us all, I'm writing in this Megillah the story of David Hamelech. And do you know why David earned the ability to be legitimate? Do you know why through him will come the ultimate Yeshua, Mashiach, and the Geulah Shlema? It's because of the ohel. Whose tent? The tent of Sarah Imenu. Ayei Sarah ishtecha hine ba'ohel. That's the Yeshua. Yish'i ba'ohel. Ladies, that was a very important remez that Shmuel HaNavi provided us, because the entire purpose of Megillat Ruth was to tell us about the lineage of David Hamelech. You know what this teaches me? And what it should teach you? What you have to walk away from all of this, besides the fact you should now be you should be now on I don't know, some elevated somewhere, I don't know which rakia. But besides that, it teaches us women the importance, the power, and the magnitude of tzniyut. Because without tzniyut, there's no Mashiach. Without tzniyut, without modesty, there would be no Mashiach ben David. Mashiach comes in the merit of tzniyut. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees that the Jewish women are modest, and what that's supposed to do is reaffirm our derech, the derech of the women. It solidifies the ways of the Jewish people, of the Jewish women. It reaffirms the ways of Sarah Imenu. Our tzniyut is reaffirming the validity of Ruth. It's reaffirming the validity of David HaMelech. And it's reaffirming the strength and the legitimacy of Mashiach Tzidkenu. There's a story that Rebbetzin Kanievsky told not too long ago. A story that took place this past March. It seems that someone parked a car with 100 kilos of explosives, and he parked it in the Cinemall in Haifa near a supporting pillar. And had the car exploded, it would have destroyed that pillar, which held a section of the first floor of the mall. And besides that kind of damage that it would have caused, other cars that were in the parking lot would have caught fire from the explosion, and then the gas tanks would have exploded, and it would have been a horrendous tragedy, a catastrophe she'en kamo. What happened? A passerby saw the smoke coming out of the car, and he quickly called the police, and within minutes the bomb squad, professional bomb squad, was there, and they were able to defuse the explosives, and the explosion never took place. Says Rabanit Kanievsky, here's what really happened. Several weeks before this event, a young girl in Haifa was diagnosed with stomach cancer. The tumor was so big that the doctors said there was nothing left to do. So they told her, listen, go home and enjoy the final weeks of your life. So this non-religious girl and her parents, they begged the doctors, they said, please don't give up on me. Please, you have to try, you can't just give up. And the doctors felt so bad that they finally agreed, and they told her, you know what? Come tomorrow for emergency surgery, but we don't promise anything. We'll take a look to see what's going on there. That night, the girl pleaded with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and she said, Ribono shel olam, I once went to a shiur Torah where I learned that there was a Bet Mikdash, and people were able to bring korbanot and plead their case. But now there is no Bet Mikdash, but I still want to bring you a korban. So she goes to her closet, and she takes out all her immodest clothing. She took it to the backyard, she made a fire, and she threw all the clothing into the fire. And as all the clothing were being consumed by the flames, she turned to the Ribono shel olam and she said, Ribono shel olam, zeh hakorban sheli, this is my korban. The next day, the girl went to the hospital in her nightgown because she had nothing to wear. She threw everything out. She burnt everything, and she had the surgery. And miraculously, the tumor was not as dangerous as they thought it was. It was completely contained, it was easily removed, Baruch Hashem, and it was benign. So the girl called all her non-religious friends to tell them about this nest that she had. And when she was well enough, when she came home and she was able to get out of bed, she had a Seudat Hodaya in her home, and she asked all her friends to come. And out of inspiration, they were so inspired, she was able to convince all of her friends to also throw their clothing into the fire. So they go again out to the yard and they make a big bonfire, and all the girls threw their immodest clothing into the flames. So now, none of them had what to wear. So they decide to, as a group project, they all wanted to go to the cinema in Haifa to buy new clothes that are tzniyut, that are modest. The day that they went to buy the clothes was the day that this bomb was supposed to explode. But these girls were inside the mall buying new, modest clothing. Asks Rabanit Cohen, is it a coincidence that a civilian saw the smoke? No. This was a nest that was brought down by HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a reward for their tzniyut. Your job as women is to continue to be the torch bearers of tzniyut and to fortify the legitimacy of David Hamelech, to continue to establish the legitimacy of Mashiach by your modesty. Hinei ba'ohel. Se'i ratzon, that as a result of our efforts to maintain our tzniyut, all the imahot should smile down upon us from Shamayim, and they should plead to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on our behalf. We should merit to bring nachat, ruach to Sarah Imenu as we continue to follow in her ways of tzniyut. May we be worthy to be true benot melech, to embrace our honor with dignity and with pride, to know from whom we descend and how much greatness we create in the world, how much depends on us. But most of all, may every article of clothing that we choose to wear that's modest and noble, every word that we utter that's refined and stately, every step that we take that's dignified and majestic, it should be a living testimony of Ruth HaMoaviya's validity, and it should continue to provide David HaMelech alav shalom in the Shamayim with his legitimacy, because in the zechut of our tzniyut, we continue to reaffirm his rightful place amid the Kahal Kadosh, amid Am Yisrael. And Bezrat Hashem, if we do this, it's going to yield tremendous Yeshuot from Shamayim. And these two great ancestors, Ruth and David, are going to continue to beseech HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the ultimate Geula, so that Mashiach can legitimately be crowned and can legitimately reveal himself and bring us all back home in the merit of the Nashim Tzadkaniyot. Amen, Ken, Yehi Ratzon. Chag Sameach, Shavua Tov.